Today we're going to be talking about traits and events, and we're going to kind of be bouncing back and forth between how we use traits and events in the jobs portal and how we use traits and events in the volunteer portal. They're used for basically the same purpose, but the screens are just slightly different, very minimally. So, I'll be kind of bouncing back and forth. So, if you're just a VAS district, bear with me, and if you're just a JAS district, bear with me, and we'll try to make sure it makes sense to everybody. So let's get rolling. So hold on, let me just get a couple things so I forget. So traits and events. So today I want to talk about how to use traits and events basically to mark a user's records, whether they're an applicant or a volunteer. And then when you do that, that makes it so that you can search for those applicants and volunteers by those traits and events that you're using, or kind of the inverse of that, search for people who don't yet have those traits or events. So it's a nice way to manage your data. And with the volunteer system, it really is who and who you haven't cleared to be a volunteer yet. So we're going to kind of go into detail. So first, how to use them. Then we're going to go over, how to add them, and then how to use that data. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is where to go in your system to add either new traits and events or modify the ones that you currently have, or to inactivate something. So that's kind of my plan. Of course, if there's other things we need to talk about, if you have questions, I am more than happy to answer those questions and go over things with you. So let's get going. So when you're in either applicant search or volunteer search, you would conduct your search, whether it's by a specific job or like with volunteers, it might be by the status, looking for complete people. Once you have that data, and the data shows at the bottom part of your screen, it's really simple to add a trait or event. You start by clicking the pencil by their name so you can edit and mark their record. And when you do that, it opens the next screen, and then you would open the record, and actually I think it defaults to their personnel tab, but you would go and you would specifically click on that traits or event tab. And it looks just like this. This is the view from, I believe, the JAS side of things, so the job side. And so once you've done that, you can choose to add either a trait or an event. Our volunteers, we use both. We use them in sequence, and we'll kind of talk about why when we do that example. But adding an event is relatively simple. You always start by finding that lovely little plus sign. That's our add button. And then when you do that, the screen below opens, and your next step would be to choose the event that you want to mark or add to that particular user's record. So on my example, I'm on the JAS portal, and I want to mark this user as someone that we've approved to substitute. So I would go, and from my drop-down field, I would find the event I want. So in my sample, it's the approved to substitute. And in the JAS, my date I like to record is usually the date I did it. In volunteers, we put the date that the volunteer would expire. So, our window of approval would go there. The big difference between JAS and volunteer is we give you a second date field in JAS. So if you need to, for some reason, have a second date, I can't even have an example that comes to mind, but that's where I need Sherry. But that's an option. So you'll see there's a second date event. And then the next field is called the event data. And that's basically a place for you to leave a small comment if you needed to, related to that event. Like if you're doing a disclosure, and we mark disclosures by adding events, and say we have disclosure in review is the event we selected, you might put a note under the event data field saying, I gave the form to so-and-so to review, or you could leave yourself a little message like the date or who or what, just so you have a little more data. Or when it comes back, they say they're not going to approve them, you could put a little note that not to be approved per so-and-so, just to kind of spark a little memory of why you're doing that. And then the next field looks a little different between the systems, but when you're in the JAS system, you have a box that says hide search. When you check that box, that event will not be included in the applicant summary. It's going to hide it. It's not going to be searchable. So hiring managers would not be able to see that event on the applicant summary. Why do we do that? Well, sometimes there's confidential data that we want HR personnel to be aware of, but not necessarily a hiring manager. You know, when it comes to hiring, there's sometimes the less, you know, we want to protect people, and only those that really need to know should be brought in, you know, to the knowledge of whatnot, just to keep people safe and not to get in any trouble with the hiring and everything. So that's my ramble. So after you've selected the field that you need in relation to that event, you would press save. And the record would be saved and you would see it. The second thing that you can do on the Traits and Events tab is to select a trait. And it's a little easier than even adding an event. You would just go to your drop-down and you would find the trait or traits that you want to add, and you would find it, click on it, and it would show up in the box below. And you can add multiple traits, as many as you need. And if you were wanting to delete a trait, you would just click in the actual box and that trait would disappear from the record. This looks exactly the same whether you're in volunteer or JAS, and it acts exactly the same. So here is an applicant, and you can see that I went in and these are the traits that are now attached to their application, and here's my event that I put in and attached to their application. Let me see what I got going in here. Okay. So once you've added this data, you have the ability to start searching for people based on that data, or searching for people who are missing that data. So it's a useful tool in marking applicants and volunteers. So in order to manage your list of applicants, you can search for specific traits or events. You can also, like I said, search for ones that are not attached, so we call them missing traits and events. Example 1, on the volunteer portal, you would search for volunteer applicants that have completed their application, and you would work through that list to clear them, to get them approved or not to be a volunteer within your district. So you would go through your process, you'd look them up in Watch or whatever system you use to do their background check, and then after you make the decision whether or not you're going to approve that volunteer, you would go in and you would add the appropriate trait and event. And the nice thing with like the volunteer system is when you attach that event, you can also have an email that goes out at the same time. So not only are you marking and clearing them in the system then knows to notify that particular person that, hey, thank you very much, you have been cleared, you are now approved to volunteer, and whatever you want that email message to say, and to have any instructions. I do believe that you can also do the same in JAS. So if you have an event that you want to attach to an applicant and you need to have an email that corresponds to that event, talk to me and I'll show you the steps to connect that email with that particular event. So I've gone in, I marked my volunteer that they're cleared, I've given them the approved trait and event, so I can now pull my reports. So then the next time I come in, I'm going to do that same search in essence, but I'm also going to include that missing trait field, and I'll show what that looks like in a few minutes. So then the next time I look at my list, I don't have to look at the people that I've already approved. I'm done with them. I want to get them off my list and only be searching for the people I still need to look at. So that's where that trait and event comes in handy. So I can say, give me the list of everybody who I have not added this trait to yet. So hopefully that makes sense. Another example, and this is an example that one of our districts actually does to help manage their postings. So I have a particular district that posts a teacher pool job every spring. So they have this one big, massive teacher pool. And they have a practice where they screen all of their applicants before they let their hiring managers see them. And they use traits and events to organize that list so they know kind of where they are and they can get data related to that giant pool. So an example, or a couple of the things they do is as they're reading through, they screen, and then they will mark the ones that kind of they want to go to the next level, so to speak. Like, we've looked at this person, we've screened this person, this is someone that we'd like to interview. So they would go in and add this interview trait. So then when they're ready to start scheduling interviews, they would come in and they'd pull that same job number, but they'd include that trait so that it would know who out of that big pool is going to be invited for an interview. So that's one way they use traits and events to manage data. They also like to keep track of who they've offered to so they can quickly pull a list and who they ultimately place. They also mark kind of where people should fit, you know, so when they're looking at that teacher pool and they're reading through their endorsements and stuff, they like to mark people who have a dual language capability because it's a big issue within their district. And they might differentiate on that list who would be a fit for an elementary position and who would be fit for a secondary. So then when they go in, they can pull data related to all these different variables to help them manage their list. And that's how they do it. A little more complex example, but just an idea of how people are actually putting this into practice. Third example, and probably one of the most common examples, the substitute pools. So if you have a substitute pool position, you don't want to keep screening the same substitutes over and over again. You want a way to mark who you looked at and decided to have as a sub. You know, we now have that substitute role, which is nice, but some people still like to do adding traits and events because it's easier for them to pull lists and kind of see where they are with like how many subs have we hired this year. So after you hire your substitute, you would go in and give them the trait of, you know, substitute certificated or approved to sub or whatever. It's also nice because this is a way to differentiate what type of sub they might be. So you could have multiple traits like a certificated sub, a classified sub, a classified secretarial sub, you know, a paraeducator sub. So when you're screening your subs, if they have the qualifications for different types of subs, you could mark them. So you could keep a list of like this person is qualified to be a secretarial clerical sub and a paraeducator, or maybe some really only should be a paraeducator sub or a maintenance substitute. So it's another way to kind of organize and to control, I don't know what the right words are, but to organize your data, okay? And hopefully that's making sense and I'm not rambling too much. So when it comes time to, after you've been adding your traits and events, how do I find and how do I locate that data within the system? So you're still in applicant search, and these also work in applicant reports, because if you open both screens, you'll see that the search features are pretty much identical. It's just your output is different. In applicant search, you're going to get the applicants down below, and you can edit records and stuff and open them up. When you do reports, you're going to get that data information on a report format, so you can print it out. So that's kind of the difference, but the searching capabilities are the same. So you're going to go and you're going to, if you're searching by trait, you're going to need to expand that preference endorsements traits field by clicking that plus sign, and it's going to open the screen, and over on the right-hand side, you're going to have the ability to select the traits you're looking for. And you can select multiple traits, and you can also decide, is it going to be and or? So do I want someone who has, if I'm going to do more, they need to have both traits or all the traits by clicking into the and radio button. So saying I want to know who is a certificated and classified sub, or if I want to have a list of someone who has either or trait, you would select the or radio button. If you don't select either one and you put data in, it's going to default to the or option. So just kind of remember that. And so after I've compiled or selected my list of traits that I'm interested in collecting, then I would press the search button and I would get a list of applicants below that matched up with that trait in my search. Okay. When you're in VAS, that data looks a little different. It's under, traits, events, and missing items. It's a little smaller. We don't collect as much information on volunteers, so our search screen is smaller. And you would come to this field here, and you would select those traits that you're looking for. And you'll notice on volunteers, you really get, you can do the same and or option. So I can look for everybody that has both or is all of these selected traits, or has a combination or has at least one of them by selecting or. And then I would press the search button and I would get my list. You can search for missing traits. So if I'm going through and I'm giving my subs the trait of substitute, and I go back to that posting and I want to see who doesn't have that trait yet, because I want to continue working through that list and hiring my subs, I would go to the events, ordered preferences, and missing items field within applicant search or applicant reports. Click that plus sign to expand the screen, and the menu looks like this. And you'll notice that we have highlighted the missing fields in red to kind of help them stand out on the page, because sometimes people are confusing them and getting frustrated. And so then we would find that missing trait field, we would pick the trait that we're interested in searching for, click search, and we get a list of anybody who does not have that trait. Okay? And very similar in VAS, the only difference is they're not in red. I don't know why that is. Maybe we'll ask them to change that. So you're just going to go and select the trait that's not there and search for your list of volunteers. Okay. Searching for events in the jobs side of the world. So once again, I'm going to expand the field, and your events are on top here. And you'll notice you don't get to search for multiple events like you do traits. So you can only search one event at a time. You would select the appropriate event and search, just like you do. And very similar process in VAS. It's just in a slightly different location. And select it, search. You can also search for missing, and it's in that same area on the JAS, expand, put in the event, and search. And same with volunteers. You're going to put it up here and search. So your event's on top, your missing event is below. Okay. Questions about adding traits or events, or searching for traits or events? I know I've got a lot of you muted. You can click on the little icon next to your name to unmute yourself, or type in the chat feature if you don't know who you are or how to do that, and I'll read your question aloud and then answer it. So kind of the next step is, where do I go in my system to set up traits and events? Like I showed you that one site had some pretty specific and interesting ways they're using to mark their pool. And, you know, if you want to learn more about different ideas or what other people are doing, contact the support team and we can have a, you know, a conversation with you individually on data and ways of tracking it and just things that might be helpful to you. But if you're one of those people who just wants to go and set things up or edit what's already there, of course you're going to go to the lookup tables. Lookup tables are, in essence, your setup tables. So you're going to hover over that System Manager tab. You're going to select the lookup tables, and traits and events are specifically found under the shared lookup tables because they are shared between portals if you're a multi-portal system. So you're going to go to the event table. It's called Event Types. Open it, and it's going to give you a list of everything within your system, and you'll see right away which portal by the event type. So we've got applicant events, we've got volunteer events. You'll even say some that are employees or any. And if you want some specific information on like what any means, we can talk about that individually. So on my site, right here, this is my demo site. This is all the different events that I have established. You can see right away you have the option of adding a sort. So that's the order that they are listed when you click on that drop-down field. So if there's one that you use a lot in you want at the top, you have the option to sort. If you don't add a sort, it just goes alphabetically. So that's sometimes helpful to know because you may, over time, end up with a really long list and you don't want to have to type and find it and you want to move it to the top. That would be a way to do that. You can inactivate any events that you're no longer using. The way the system's set up is we don't delete stuff necessarily. We like to have a record. So that's where the inactive comes up. And oftentimes you can't delete something if there's data tied. So you would just inactivate it. If you wanted to edit an existing event, you're going to click the pencil or edit button. And you would go in and make your changes. When you add a new one, you always need to select the event type. So which portal is it going to be associated with? You're going to add, the description is basically the name, the type, you know, of the event. And then we talked about if you wanted to have any messages tied to that event. So if I have, maybe when I decide to add a disclosure, an event for disclosure hits not cleared, I could have a message that goes out to the applicant, you know, that says, thank you very much for applying. You had a disclosure hit, and based on the information, blah, 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 you know, we're not going to be able to whatever. So you could tie that, but any event or trait, or any event, sorry, no matter which portal, you have the ability to link it up to an automatic message. We most typically do that with all of our volunteer sites. So when you approve someone, you can send out a letter welcoming the volunteer and kind of explaining their next steps. Or if you choose not to approve them because of something that came up in that background check process, the system could send them a nice email explaining that they're not going to be approved and maybe who they could contact if they wanted to have further discussion about it. Hopefully that all makes sense. I'm not sure what the test number field is for. I should ask Sherry, but she was not available this morning, so I have no clue. And here's an example of when you're adding a new event. I click the Add button, and these are the fields that will open up, and you'll notice this is a drop-down to pick the type in my name, and if I want a message, I can select it from this drop-down. So any of my email messages from the email message table could show up here, and like I said, if I want to give it a sort, I can assign the sort. Save my work or return whatever I need to do. Okay. Trait types. Trait types are also found in the lookup tables, shared lookup tables, and the table they're in is called trait types. And just like events, when I open it, I'm going to get a list and I'm going to see exactly which portal it belongs to. So volunteer, applicants, employees, any subs, whatever. And I can see, I can add a sort. I can inactivate people, click on the pencil, check that inactive button, save it. If there's no data in the system and I want it gone, I can delete it. Okay, go to the next slide. And just like events, it's very simple to add one. You're going to start by clicking New Item, pick the portal, give it a name, and decide if you're going to have a sort or not, and then save your work. So that's it. I mean,